Hi everyone, I'm Abhijeet Malik from PwC, and welcome to our podcast series, Startups of Today for the Impact of Tomorrow. In this episode, we are going to be discussing the relationship between startups and accelerators. And I'm so excited that we have two wonderful guests to discuss this exactly with me. First of all, we have Hanna Asmussen, who is a founder and CEO of Localyze. And I'm actually going to ask you, Hannah, to introduce yourself, but also tell us a bit more about your company and why did you decide to found it?
Yes, of course. I'll try to keep it short. Very excited to be here today. My name is Hannah, originally from Germany, living in Lisbon right now. And I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Germany, but then decided to move abroad when I was 15. And that sparked a lot of excitement for doing that more often. But what I always encountered is that I think traveling is easy, but like if you want to work abroad, it's incredibly hard with everything you need around like immigration and relocation. And I decided to turn that into a company together with my two co-founders, and that was almost 4 years ago now. It's been a very interesting journey, and what we do now is like we help individuals and companies with all those topics around like immigration, relocation, and like for HR to track all of that. We're a company of 75 people right now, spread across Europe, and it's been a very interesting journey. So I'm happy to talk about that today.
Wonderful. And having lived in 5 countries myself, I can tell you, yeah, it is sometimes something that someone needs a lot of help with. So it's good that you have a solution for that. And introducing my second guest is Magali Roy Bentley. And Magali is an associate with Norrsken Impact Accelerator. So, Magali, welcome. Please do introduce tell us a bit more about the Norrsken Impact Accelerator and how is it that is it so famous and so successful that so many people know about it and apply for it?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me as well. Super happy to be here. And of course, so the Norrsken Impact Accelerator is running its second year now. So we're still relatively new and we're learning a lot, but we're enjoying the journey as well and getting to onboard 20 impact startups. So we began last year and then we took on 20, like I said, impact startups that are going to somehow make a big difference in the world. But also at Norrsken, we believe a lot in the purpose of having both impact and business intertwined so that as the business grows, so will the impact. So it's not only focusing on impact, but also the ability to create profit and hand in hand. And so I think that as well, because of the role of Norrsken in the past few years, even before the accelerator opened, there's been a lot of traction there. And the network that they have built has been fantastic, which has also then, of course, was the seed for the accelerator and how it began when we noticed that we have such great network around us that we really want to tap into, because at the core of what we're doing in the whole ecosystem that is Norrsken is that we're trying to promote impact entrepreneurs through this ecosystem. So that it was natural to then open an accelerator and tap into this.
Thank you. So, the reason I'm so excited to have the two of you is because of our theme today, which is around startups and accelerators. We know that startup founders have great ideas and great products, but sometimes they could benefit with the expertise of going through an accelerator, getting the right introductions to the investors, to mentors, to new markets, and maybe just some advice. Um, that's probably the reason why startups consider going to accelerators. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah. Your company has actually been through two different accelerators already, right?
Actually, three afterwards. I had to think about it, and then I actually even more. Yes, definitely. And I think for us, it was really super helpful in the trajectory of the company.
So, one of the things that I think a lot of our listeners would be interested in is, you're a startup and you obviously want to go through an accelerator for all the benefits. But how do you stay sort of honest and truthful to the origins of your company? Like, is that something that you sort of thought about while or before applying for an accelerator? That is it something that's going to still keep us loyal to your origins?
Yeah. I think like that definitely you really have to look for what is a fit also stage wise. And I think like even more than kind of like, does it help me can I stay true to the companies? Like, do I keep enough ownership? I think like that's an important topic because like a lot of accelerators come at a cost in terms of equity. And I think like that's probably the biggest risk. But so you really have to look for what is like the benefit, literally like cost and benefit. And we did 2 programs where we had to give away equity, and like one that was equity free. The third one that I actually forgot was like so it's sponsored by the German government. It's like the German Accelerator where they help you with like international expansion in the US. And so for us, each of the accelerators that we did were good at the stage that we went through, and kind of like also in terms of knowledge that we had previously. So like if you started a company before, have existing network, you might have like very different needs in terms of what you need from an accelerator, and like you might get a lot from network. But so there are a lot of points influencing that decision, and I think like there you really have to consider that, and also more of like the long-term impact, because when you go into an accelerator, typically the company is very small, and like it is hard to imagine that it can like how you think about the equity 5 years ahead. But so I think this is just something super important to consider.
So staying on that, I mean, what would be your recommendation in terms of how should a startup or founder self-assess that, this is the right time for us to consider an accelerator?
Yeah. So there are different things. Like first, I would always look at what is the focus of that accelerator. Like what can they provide? Is it, for example, like is it access to investors? Is it access to potential customers? Is it like great mentors and knowledge? Or like I think like there are various factors around that. I can maybe like share it from our perspective. So when we started out, we all came from different backgrounds, but we didn't have any access to the startup world. So like we didn't have any mentors that we could go to, any investors that we could go to. And so for us, when we looked for the first accelerator, it was like, okay, we really need someone for those first steps. And then we looked for what is their focus, like what can they really support you with. So for example, in Hamburg, the accelerator that we did is like Next Commerce Accelerator, which is kind of like adjacent, like it's not 100% what you would associate us with, but they had super interesting companies they were backed by. And so that for us gave us a great like first network to get test customers to develop the product with. I think like that accelerator back then was super, super young. So we couldn't look at what portfolio did they already have. And so that was like rather, okay, like we need someone for those first steps. The second accelerator that we did is probably the most famous one, Y Combinator. And there you have a very big set of portfolio companies and alumni that you could also talk to, like in terms of what benefit do you get out of it. And there was also, of course, the brand that you got with. And then for the third one, for the German Accelerator, it was right after YC. And there we wanted to stay in the US and like explore the market a bit. They had a great network of mentors. So also there it was like perfect fit. But we also talked to alumni. And I think like that is something that I would definitely do, kind of like do your own due diligence, talk to alumni, because some accelerators also promise a lot that then you cannot deliver, or maybe like also it's not 100% a fit. So I think like that's really something that I would always do.
I can completely relate to your feeling, as you said, you and your team when you were coming together to start your company, because I have wanted to work in the startup field and I have chosen the safer option to work in it from a PwC perspective. But Magali, coming to you, this issue that Hanna raised is very interesting regarding equity. So I believe that the Norrsken Impact Accelerator actually does take equity in the companies that are going through the program. Why is that, and why do you believe that that's actually the right thing to do?
Well, again, also it depends as well on what the startup wants and what they're looking for. I think Hanna put it really well, what you should be looking for, and you should be talking with alumni, making sure that it's a fit. So also that's a question that you need to take into consideration yourself if you're going to be wanting to pay a program fee, or take okay to give some equity. And on our side, that is what we do. And we chose this as the best fit for us and what we provide, because we're trying to provide aligned incentives even past the program. And we think that by having a little bit of skin in the game, that means that we really want them to succeed, and we want them to expand, to grow as much as possible. And so it's not just a program fee and then we give them a high five when they leave and then maybe we don't talk with them again. We do our best to make sure that we can provide them still with the help that they need, if that's networks or connections. And so I think that by having this sort of aligned incentives, you are showing as well to the world that you really believe in this startup. And so because we take right now 20 per batch, we're also saying that these 20 that we've vetted, we've looked at, we believe in them, and we believe in them enough as well to put equity, to put some money in here as well. And then, but like I said, it's a choice. And for us, this is what makes sense. We're doing a boutique accelerator. We're really focusing on producing a really high quality accelerator with equity in the game. But if a startup wants to go the program fee, then also that is something that I wouldn't recommend one way or the other, because I think it really depends on what the startup's needs are.
Okay, now that's interesting. And just to come back to that, the 20 shortlisted companies that you have, from your point of view, it's not just about, if I understand correctly, it's not just about the equity. The equity is about the commitment that your accelerator is making into that story, for example, which is quite interesting to hear that perspective from both sides. But I'm sure, Magali, like you have had discussions with some of the startups which are coming through your program, which have sort of asked the same question, which is, you're taking equity. We're obviously sort of interested in your accelerator, but how did those discussions go? Or, you were able to sort of convince them in the sense that they could stay true to their purpose by staying in your program?
Yes, good question. So we really also push on the fact that if you're joining an accelerator, it's for a purpose. It's not just for fun or anything flashy. You're going to be getting something out of it. And the whole point of an accelerator is in the word. It's to accelerate your growth. So if you're coming to join an accelerator and you're going to be taking equity, then we're also putting on our side of the table the promise as well that we're really going to push you forward as well. And in that respect, we're going to also increase as well your valuation. We're going to do our best to increase your valuation, make sure that also you get the stage that you require, to make sure that other connections or potential investors are going to be able to notice you. So we really see that it's not just a take, we're doing a give and take situation here.
So in my introduction, I had actually mentioned that how is your accelerator so famous, because I want to point out the fact that the 20 are the actual participants, but you get far more applications than that. But even for the 20 that you are sort of taking in, just in a few years, like your accelerator has made a name for itself, at least in this the Stockholm ecosystem, but more broadly internationally as well. What's been that secret to the success of your accelerator spreading that word, but also that reflecting in the number of applications you're getting?
Yes, definitely. So I think that we can start off from like the broader circle first, which is Norrsken and the brand that they have created. And as you mentioned, they have created a really strong brand in the Nordics, but they're also starting to expand this. So for example, we also have a house, a Norrsken house in Kigali, Rwanda. So we also have a very large presence beginning to spread as well in sub-Saharan Africa. And so just like I said, starting from that part of the circle, we've been able to then harness a lot of that network that was created as well with the founder Niklas Adelbert. And so that was a really good ground to begin the platform to then create the accelerator. And so we've been able to tap into those networks as well. But there's been a lot of thought that's gone into how to make this a really unique accelerator and make sure that we're going to be providing something that the startups need that's not maybe necessarily already on the market. And so, as I mentioned before, we really want to be this boutique accelerator that really tailors to the needs of the startups. And I think that if you look as well at our alumni base and how happy they were with the accelerator in 2021, we've really nailed that and we've done a really good job. And so I think that with that, you then spread the word, and not only amongst the alumni and the people that they know, but as well the mentors that we have on board that are absolutely fantastic. And they spread from impact entrepreneurs to unicorns to like major investors. And they also have a fantastic experience within the accelerator themselves as mentors. And especially because of one of the primary components as well, which is the impact angle, we really, really focus on companies that are trying to make a difference for good in the world. And I think that that is so needed and so important. And these mentors, they see that as well. And therefore the word spreads, because this is a really important topic to make sure that we can accelerate startups that are trying to do good.
Thanks for that. So, actually, Hannah, if you can help me with the startup perspective there. So, you've been through 3 accelerators. Being through that journey itself was one thing, but now after, coming through as an alumnus of those programs, does the things that Magali is saying, does that resonate with you? Those introductions and those mentors. I mean, has that journey sort of continued for you in the longer run, and perhaps not just for Localyze, but for other participants of your programs?
Yeah. I would say it depends. I think like there, and like to be honest, like in Localyze example, we have kind of like made that step-by-step transition where like once we joined kind of like the next accelerator, the first one didn't provide that much value anymore, because like then, for example, like the first one that we went through was incredibly helpful in the first year, but then now the mentor network after joining YC, it's like a different story. And I think like then if you get to that point, this is like, then it was actually successful, because like then you accelerated the transition to of the startup to the next level. And I think like that's also it. If you can provide value for the next 5 years, the startup is probably not as successful as you wish it to be. So like that's why I think like there's an end to it. With Y Combinator, I think like there it's a bit of a different story, just because like you have like they've been active now for such a long time, for more than 10 years I think, and so like they have an alumni network where you have other unicorns and you can reach out to them, like you have a forum, etc. And so I think like then there you get even more value, like not even like from the mentors, but like other alumni, for example. What Y Combinator does very well there is that they have like a forum where everyone can ask questions. And so I think that is super helpful. Like literally for every stage, like you continue to have that value. But I think like that's then something like where what an accelerator can do is like just like try to like get the best startups in and to create that alumni network. I think like that's also still the beauty of YC. And then otherwise, like for the German accelerator, it was always for us. We knew that like for that specific period where we were looking at the US market, they were incredibly helpful, but it was always like tied to like that specific time frame, which I think is also fine. So again, coming to the point, what do you want to get out of it? So I think like with YC, that was the most expensive accelerator for us. It was I think like 7% that they take, so we knew that we got the brand, we got the access to investors, and the access to the alumni network. So also there, like you don't really have a mentor network. So I think like that's why it depends. But yeah, you have to make that calculation, what you get out for like what time frame.
So, as they say, things are always best in hindsight. So, let me ask the same question to you, but like, please imagine yourself at the beginning of your process when you were looking at the accelerators. What are the questions that you would recommend that startups ask around, or the research that they should do regarding the accelerators? And that connection as to like themselves, what their needs are, and which accelerator fits that need.
Yeah. So first of all, I would really like ask the critical question, like, can I get there, like, otherwise? Like, do I get access? So for example, I think like that's the thing with mentors. Personally, I think like you can always get access to mentors yourself. And so this is like something, just as an example, like what I even reached out to people via LinkedIn, and kind of like if now I would reach out to the founder of Stripe, like maybe now I'm in a position where that would actually work, but I think like 3 years ago that wouldn't have worked. But like I probably don't get that access, but I get access to like founders who are maybe one step ahead, who raised like a first seed round. And so I think like that is really something where you're sometimes surprised by like how much you can get out of an existing network. Like there's always like someone who knows someone, but like for us in the beginning, we really thought we don't even know who to ask. So like really like we're quite far removed, and I think like there it was just like, okay, this can actually be super helpful. But I think like that's just something that I would ask, because very often it's also like what I mentioned initially with the test companies that we were expecting out of our first accelerator. In the end, like from the 20 companies that the accelerator was backed by, one of them agreed to be like a test customer, like the others we still had to find like somewhere else. So they like really be like very critical on, okay, and ask all of those questions to an alumni, like, okay, how helpful have they actually been? Because it's like, I think like also every investor, a lot of investors, like also VC funds always say like, yeah, like we're incredibly helpful, like we can help you with everything. And then it's like, that's like the most critical question to actually like ask yourself. And like try to make a calculation of like that equity. I think like that's something important depending on like how much equity you're giving away. Like for the first accelerator, we gave away 5%, but like they also had an option to do 10% and then you got more investment. And I'm quite critical on that, because I think like 10% at that early stage, it's a lot, and like that can really like change your like cap table dynamics later on. So be like very critical and like try to, I think like at the beginning people are impatient, like want to do the first steps, but like try to think a bit further ahead, and like try to think about the implications. And like for me, one of the best decisions that we took back then is that we only took 25K investment and like took the 5% instead of like 50K and like 10%. And I wouldn't have imagined that impact later on. So I think like that, kind of like to sum it up, a kind of like non-equity, non-money impact, and try to like really question that and like try to verify what you actually get out of there. Like if there's like any other way to get that. On the equity side, like try not to make the mistakes, and like try to like also do the maths behind. I think like those are the two most important points.
Thank you. So Magali, the Norrsken Impact Accelerator, coming to the point of the investors. So how good are the investors or the network that you're able to bring in for the startups which are sort of come through the program? And just for our viewers though, I am mindful that I'm mispronouncing Norsken. It's because I am hopeless at pronouncing the actual name, which is Norquin. But Magali, yes.
Yeah, so I think also the Swedes say Norrsken, I believe, but I also think that I'm saying it wrong. But that's maybe the fun part of it. Everybody has some different way of saying it. But I mean, all I can say is that I think that we have some fantastic investors on board. But like I said, the purpose of our accelerator is to connect you with people. So people who might help you with your business model or scaling or even pitching, or potential investors. But we're not making a promise that when you come here, the investors you will be meeting with are going to invest with you. But what's useful about those connections is that they can connect you to other people, or they can also give you some advice about how to do a proper fundraising strategy, about how to think to invest in the next year's time. There are nuggets of opportunity in any connection that you make if you just try to make the most of it. So I think that it is also coming in the mindset when you come into an accelerator that you're going to be offered some opportunities, and you really, really need to make the most to yourself and the team to make the most of them and really put the work in at the end of the day.
So one step before that, I mean, obviously you've selected these startups, and then it's what you're saying is it's also up to them, right? Like how they sort of use the opportunities. How does, maybe taking your example, but you can even talk more generally of other accelerators, how do they generally tend to help get those startups a bit more prepared, a bit more ready?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends again on the accelerator. The first thing is a network. That's what the accelerator is trying to help you get the network that you need. And then for us, what we do is we try to provide a lot of tailored learnings to them. So we can actually have such things as learning sessions where we talk about fundraising strategies, general marketing strategies, scaling strategies, help with legal side. So we offer, and these are optional as well, because we're very aware that when you're starting a company, you're going to be spending a lot of time starting your company. You're not going to be wanting to sit in a classroom all day. You need to be working on the operations. So we do a lot of things that are going to be optional as well. And that means that you come to the sessions that are going to be of most use to you. So if you think, oh, that's fantastic, I need to be working on my business model development, then you go to that session. And we're trying to as well make them as interesting as possible to the batch that we have. We get on 20, like I said, and we did a selection of over 2,000 applications in 3 to 4 months. And then when they come on board, we've had a lot of time to think about them, to talk with them a little bit, really, like I said, try to tailor it to them. So we then get what their needs are, and then we will offer that to them in these training sessions, as well as some lunch and learns. And then we have a lot of pitch training sessions as well, because for us, we have an 8-week sprint, and then at the end of this, it ends with Investor Day, and then they come on stage, and we don't know if maybe it's the first time they're going to be on stage in front of hundreds of people, and it can be nerve-wracking as well. And so we want them to be able to feel confident on stage. And also this comes to another really important point, is being able to clearly communicate what you do. It's such an important part for a startup to be able to do that effectively and simply. And so that we spend a lot of time as well, actually, on pitch training.
That's great. So Hannah, maybe let's pick your experience. What was the balance when you were going through those programs between focused, on your new company or going through all the lessons?
That's a very good question, and I think like that's actually like the very tricky part. I'm a fan. I'm always a fan of flexibility, because it's incredibly hard to tailor sessions kind of like to a wider group of startups, because also like it depends at that stage. It really depends on like where the founders come from, like what background knowledge they have. And so for some it is pitch training, for some it's like the kind of like business basics, for them it's like, I don't know, financial modeling, you name it. And so this is like something where in the beginning, for the first accelerator, we started out always like trying to like join all the sessions, and at some point we just like said, okay, like half of that is not useful, because like there were also a lot of B2C startups in that batch, and we're like not applicable, so like we didn't join anymore. And then it was rather that we tried to get get something out of like mentors, and like I think like pitch training, things like that's something that's probably like more general, but especially on like business model or like even pricing, sales, etc. I think like there's such a big difference. So I think like that's really something like where mentors can often be like a more flexible option, because like then people can also choose, okay, like who do I want to talk to? And I think like with the sessions, like keep that condensed, and like from a startup perspective, like really try to be very strict with your time. What I found super interesting there is like the approach of YC. You didn't get a lot of input, so I think like we only met once per week, and then we had a dinner together with like the startups that were in your subgroup, and then you always had like a speaker there with like founders of Airbnb and others, and so like really good input. But like the rest of the time, it was just, okay, like you sit at home, like you live together with your co-founders, and yet like you don't do anything else than working. And I think like they also said, like we're the last batch that was in person, by the way. And like they said, okay, everyone has to go to San Francisco. And I think like that was just, it was such a mentality where you were sitting together and everyone was like working incredibly hard. You were like really felt bad if you took a break on Sunday. I think like there's just a different like mentality, different approach. And then for the last accelerator, we got some input, like some sessions again, but also there we like tried to be like very strict on what do we join and what not, because I think like also, especially at a later stage, it becomes even harder because like the trajectories of the startups start to diverge even more, like your knowledge level. So yeah, I think like they're kind of like it shifts even more towards maybe like some very specific mentors that you need, and rather like less input.
Well, I really liked your idea of reaching out for mentors yourself on LinkedIn. That's something that I should do in finding mentors. Although no one's ever approached me on LinkedIn as a mentor, so that probably speaks that I am not an expert on anything.
You have to add
But
to your LinkedIn. Like, you have to specifically add like, "Hey, I'm a mentor." Like you have to. There's like all those like I'm a consultant, mentor, etc. And I think like then you have to like pimp your LinkedIn profile, and then
that's a good pointer to all our viewers. And Magali, like we're coming to the sort of end of our discussion, and I wanted to sort of end by also asking you one step even before you're helping the startups prepare, which is when you're selecting them. I mean, your accelerator is focused on impact, right? So you have already a set criteria, and when you're evaluating, let's say, 2,000 startups, I'm sure you must have a sort of set criteria around that. But really, is it just the criteria, or are there other things that you're looking for in the startup when you're making that decision that, hey, they make the final cut of the 20, or they don't? Like, what are those things that you're looking for?
Yeah, so all of them arrived here from coming from different backgrounds. They arrived here from different paths. So there is no one size fits all. And then also, it's hard to say, hard to explain what the X factor is. That is the whole point of the X factor as well. But then generally, we do have some sort of guidelines that we follow to make sure that, the chances of success of this company are high. And that has to be aligned and inside within the impact as well that they will produce. Because of course, we saw a lot of good companies as well that were fantastic, but the impact angle was perhaps not there. So just to have to say that, of course. And then we looked a lot at the team. That is, of course, crucial. And so specifically as well, the co-founders and the experience that they have, but then also the team dynamics that they have and the people on the team to be able to produce their product, whether it be hardware or software. And there is like a flow diagram for each one of those. So if it's hardware, then you want more technical expertise on the team. If it's software, then you just want some maybe experience in the fintech space beforehand. So it all has to make sense at the end of the day when you follow that through, that, okay, these all make sense for like a really strong team together. And then as well, just in terms of the selection side of, if I'm thinking as well about being in the shoes of the startup, you know your product so well that sometimes I feel it's possible to lose the overview of how you're sharing it to the world. So in terms of having reviewed over 2,000 applications, sometimes we received some applications that were very like overly complicated. And so if you can't tell your idea in a really simple form, it's going to maybe be difficult for investors to try to sit down and digest that, because it tend to be looking at maybe hundreds of applications on the go. And so that also comes down to maybe having a really nice refined pitch deck as well. But then in terms of the criteria for what makes an excellent startup, then it would be the team, a solution that when you see a novel solution coming up, because sometimes you have like sort of iterations of ideas that are already out there and they could be good, but when you see a really novel solution, it really does stand out and it's quite impressive. So we're also looking for things that are people who are trying to tackle problems in the world from a completely different angle, and it's super inspiring.
Great to hear. So, Hannah, my last question to you would be something of a reverse, right? From the journey that you started to where you are and all the programs that you've been part of. If there are any accelerators listening to our podcast, what would be your sort of suggestions to them as suggestions from a startup to accelerators? What is something that they should keep in mind?
So maybe that's more kind of like from my wish list perspective, but like the big benefit that I see in accelerators is that they can bring more diverse people to the startup world, because like what typically happens, and like there's even specific, like some VC funds have like specific accelerators for that internally, that you kind of like, it's a self-feeding system. So like then you have, you say, hey, like if you worked at Intercom or N26 or whatever, like then you want to found your company, like then you can like directly approach us here. But for people who are not from the tech sector, who haven't studied at like certain business schools, it's a lot harder to penetrate the system. And so I think like that is really something that accelerators can do. So I would really try to invest a lot in like finding the startups that otherwise, that probably like, or like founders of companies who probably like haven't even heard of the term startup, but like could become something that can really help the world. I don't like build a great product. I think like that is something that I would definitely do, because like this is where accelerators could provide most value. And it's not easy, but like start building networks with like lesser known universities, like start going into maybe also like regions that are not like the prime tech regions yet. So this is something where I would like pay close attention to, because I think like they're like, otherwise someone like who worked at N26 like probably doesn't need an accelerator, because like they have an existing network, like they can get all of that somewhere else. And so that would be my number one takeaway.
Wow. So, any final words, Magali or Hannah?
I actually just wanted to add one last thing that I wanted when we're looking at applications, and we're talking right now all about accelerators and the benefits of accelerators. There is one caveat to that, though, that I would like to add, and it's something called accelerator hopping. And it's when you potentially attend like 4 or 5 accelerators, and the whole purpose of an accelerator is to push you to the next level. And so the accelerator within itself is not an issue that you're attending them, but if you're attending several accelerators and without significant growth or without significant milestones to show for that afterwards, then you're not questioning what's wrong with the accelerator, but you're questioning as well potentially what's wrong with the company for not going through all these accelerators and not seeing this growth. So I just want to give that as a caveat as well for startups out there to not try to, go into as many as possible. And I think we've tried to make that clear as well today with Hanna, that you should really put a lot of effort into choosing which accelerator you would like to join and a lot of research into that, because it's very important to make sure that it's the right one for you.
Wow. I knew that we were going to have a good discussion, but it's so nice to get like new insights, and especially from, both perspectives, from the startup perspective, from the accelerator perspective. So I'd like to thank the two of you for your time, for coming in for our podcast. For our viewers, I'd like to say, join us next time for another episode to hear such great stories and great perspectives around startups of today for the impact of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Copyright 2022 PwC. All rights reserved. PwC refers to the PwC network and/or one or more of its member firms, each of which is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This content is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.